Goeiedag en hartelijk welkom bij Reg met Robinson hier op Litnet. Die herdenking van erfenis maand het opnuut emoties opgejaag oor wie se erfenis in hierdie diverse land nou eintlik gevier moet word. Onderwerpe soos straatnaamveranderings, grondbesit en slagspreuke soos skiel de boer is te berde gebring. Op Kraddock in die Oos-Kaap het bekende skrywer Etienne van Heerden Veldsoirée gereël waarvan hierdie sensitiewe onderwerpe bespreek is. Een van die gaste was Sihle Khumalo, wat pas 'n boek vrygestel het, Milk the Beloved Country. En dit is nou hierdie boek soos wat hy dit geskryf het, Milk the Beloved Country. Nou sê, daarin skryf hy onder meer omvattend oor die geskiedenis van plekname van dorpe, strate, stede, riviere en instansies en die omstredenheid rondom naamsveranderinge. Toevallig is daar nou juist 'n rally oor die verandering van die groot William Nicol Rijlaan in Johannesburg na Winnie Mandela Laan. William Nicol was 'n NG Kerk dominee, 'n administrateur van die Ou Transvaal en stigterslid van die Afrikaner Broederbond. Welcome, Sihle. Do you believe that Winnie Mandela should be honored in this way?
Well, it's very interesting. By the way, hello, Freek. Nice having a chat with you, and I'm really looking forward to engaging in some of the issues that we are going to touch on.
Thanks.
It's really interesting that the issue of William Nicol, as far as the road is concerned, has been changed to Winnie Madikizela Mandela, because William Nicol is actually one of the persons that I cover in depth in my book that you've just introduced. But I must just say up front that I deal with the issue of names much more in depth in the book. And I come to one conclusion and one conclusion only. And that is, it is all good and well to talk about changes of street names, of towns, and of cities. But from where I'm seated, I really think as a nation, we lack the context and the foundation. Because if you ask me, one of the very first things that we should have done is really look at the name of the country. And as you and I know, South Africa is nothing else but a geographic location. So, you know, it's one thing to change the name of the street, but we lack the context. One of the things that we should have done in this regard is to really look at our name, just like other countries have done. Look at Namibia. During colonization phase, they were called Southwest Africa because that's exactly where they are located. It's their geographic location. Look at the country which today we call Kenya or Kenya. It was part of what back in the day was called the British East Africa. So when they got their independence, one of the things that they did was to change the name of the country before you start even looking at the street names and the names of towns and cities. So for me, it's yes, it's a good thing, but in the big scheme of things, I think we should focus more on the context and the foundation. And in this regard, the foundation is just the name of the country.
What you're asking for basically is a new policy, a new approach towards name changes.
Well, it's not so much the new approach. Well, the new approach is not so much the policy, it's just the new approach. And we should have done this way back in the 1990s when this issue started, you know, the issue that we might have to relook at certain names. It's just the name of the country. And as I've said, we are not going to be the first country to do this. Other countries, our neighbor, just did exactly the same thing. Botswana at one stage was called Bechuanaland. You see, and those are the things that have changed. Look at Zambia, Zimbabwe. At one stage, they were called Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, accordingly. So you see, it's just one of those natural things, I would imagine, that should have happened in the post-1994 era before we even start on obsessing about street names.
You've made a comprehensive study of name changes throughout the centuries. So what was the most interesting for you?
One of the things really that for me made a huge impact is that the name has to reflect, you know, when people are looking at a specific name, it has to reflect their aspirations. It has to be something that they can identify with. So that's the first thing. But also it must be understood that it must not just be the issue of the name change. That on its own, again, it's superficial. What is the point of changing the name from X to Y if I go to bed hungry, if I've got no place to live, I'm unemployed, and so forth and so on? So the whole issue has to be seen within the wider and the broader context of, you know, we are transforming the country, and part of it, yes, it's the street names and the name of the country, as I said, but it's more than just that. There are other things that need to happen within the context of the new South Africa that everybody keeps talking about.
Well, then, you specifically made the point that we must start talking and speak up before it's too late. So about what must we speak up, and when is it too late for what?
Right. So it was great, by the way, meeting you down in the Eastern Cape. Yes, it is very important that we, the citizens, must speak up. Part of the reason why we're in this mess that we're in as a country is because we do not speak up. There is this sense that we as South Africans have that we mostly engage around or just before the elections. So when politicians come through with their manifesto, then we engage. And then after that, we go to a lull. And then 5 years later, all of a sudden, we engage again. It is very important that we speak up about anything that troubles you. One of the chapters that I have in the book is the question, is South Africa already a failed state? We need to have that conversation. When I spoke to you, I briefly spoke about two gentlemen that I met from another country who told me, they were here in South Africa for a particular conference, who told me that when their country was going down, and that is Zimbabwe, by the way, I might as well just say, when their country was going down, they could see certain things, but because they were just hopeful, they never spoke up, but this is not right. You know, the issue of energy security, as an example, that's one of the things. In this country, we have this term now, load shedding, and it's so normalized. In fact, we are happy sometimes that is only going to be 2 hours of load shedding and not 4 hours. Those are the things that we should be speaking up against. And as far as I know, what caused this and who took responsibility and accountability with the load shedding that we have? But as South Africans, we just kind of accepted it. And those with capital are now looking at the alternatives that they can use as far as ensuring their security or security of energy is concerned. But that is not good enough because not everyone can, as an example, afford solar. So that is just one example where I'm talking about we need to speak up. We owe it to our children, we owe it to our grandchildren, we owe it to future generations that we hold our leaders accountable, we hold our leaders responsible. And the issue of voting, yes, within a democratic state, that is our voice. So we must use it accordingly. Because as I said, once you become a failed state, it almost becomes impossible to come up again. Countries that became failed states, show me one that became a failed state and in time came up. It's very difficult. So it's very important that we do whatever is humanly possible that we do not become a failed state.
Well, I think it's important that we talk to each other. That's for sure. That must happen. And we must try to live in peace with each other. But since you've called for this open kind of manner of speaking, perhaps I should put a few things to you that, for instance, do African countries really believe in democracy or not? Why do the people of Zimbabwe not speak up when they should and when the dictator was basically in charge of that country?
Issue of having frank and open conversations. This is also in the book and in the other books that I've written, that part of, when I look back, part of the weakness that we have as a country is that instead of having honest, frank, open conversations, especially leading up to 1994 and also just after 1994, after we voted on the 27th of April 1994, we were all just almost coerced into this, now we are a rainbow nation. So all of us must just abide by this, which is a vision, which is fine, but at the end of the day, there were still certain conversations that we had to deal with. As an example, it is impossible, as a fact of life, it is impossible that you will have a majority of people being oppressed, not just for decades, by the way, for centuries, and then you do not even have a conversation about reparations. I do talk about that in the book. So that is the type of open, frank conversations that I'm talking about. It's part of building the nation. I will imagine, includes the issue of frank and open conversation. And as you know, part of building a family. Sometimes we have to have very uncomfortable conversation with our own family members. Part of building the team at work means sometimes you have to have an uncomfortable conversation with people or persons that report to you, and vice versa. The person that you report to sometimes must have a comfortable conversation with you. But I just feel in this country, it's almost we're coerced not to have those uncomfortable conversations. And that is why now, generally speaking, again, South Africans still think just strictly in terms of race. That is why there are some Black people who have been disappointed by the ruling party. But instead of voting for any other alternative, they will say, which means I'll stay at home. I'd rather not vote because I voted for this party. It disappointed me. Now I cannot vote for the alternative because they are looking at things through the race perspective. And those are the things that we should be having a conversation about, that the primary policy of this country, not just for decades, but for centuries, was fundamentally on race. And we want to sort out things, but when it comes to the issue of race and racism, everybody gets extremely sensitive. And as a result, we end up with this mess where we are, where the issue of race will just now and then raise its ugly head. And we all pretend as if we do not know about it. And that is why I've said it before, just to consolidate the point, that whilst the issue of the Rainbow Nation was great as a vision, but it was presented to us, at least as far as I'm aware, as if we were already there, instead of making it a vision that we need to work towards.
There's also the perception that Africa believes in strong men, meaning strong leaders, whether it's a good leader, it's something else, but strong leaders. For instance, Mugabe, Museveni, they were initially just chosen to stay on for, say, one term, and that would be 5 years or so. But then it was changed, and now it's 30 years that Museveni has been in charge, for instance, in Uganda. And then, of course, do we care at all about human rights? Because what is happening in Ukraine at the moment, and we are all friends with the Russians at the moment, while there's a war going on.
Yes, indeed. The issue of strong men, I do touch on it in the book. And by the way, and as you know, I've traveled extensively through the rest of the African continent, doing most of the trips by public transport. And that's when you see the real challenges facing our brothers and sisters. And yes, I agree with you. Some of the people, by the way, that end up as dictators, they start off as Democrats. Then they realize that the issue of limited number of terms is in itself limiting. But that is where the issue of speaking up comes in. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Because Museveni started out as a Democrat. It's a fact of life. When he started to struck a new breath of fresh air, there is this guy, Museveni, but look where we are now. At the time where there was the presentation, or at least the starting of the conversation around the issue that the constitution will have to be amended regarding the presidential terms, that is where the speaking up should have happened. Putting the foot down and saying, no, there was a reason why there is a limit with regards to the number of terms that the president must hold. Otherwise, you end up with a problem, just like it happened in Zimbabwe, just like now it's happening in Uganda. It can't be right to have certain individual being in power for more than 30 years. It's just not good for the country. I don't care who says what, that is not good for any country. So I agree with you 100%. We need to speak up as South Africans. We need to speak up as Africans. Also the issue of Ukraine. Obviously, as South Africans, we have to speak up. It's the war that is going on. This issue of having a government that does not want to say, of course, it's a war that was going on. One country invaded another. Can we just call a spade a spade? When we engage, say those things, that there is one country, by the way, that invaded another. Yes, it could have had its reasons, but at least can we talk about the chronology of events? Let's not talk about a special operation, because actually it's just an invasion of another country. All right, so when we say we are mediating, at least let's get the context right. And as South Africans, when we engage with such issues, at least we know the sequence of events. But the sad part about this, Freek, is that an average South African, truth be told, does not think so much about the Ukrainian war. You know why? Because we are dealing with basic issues. You're dealing with somebody who does not know what he's going to eat tonight. You're dealing with somebody who does not have shelter. Those are the basic issues that we are dealing with in this country. And that is why, therefore, the issue of the war in Ukraine will then be far-fetched, or at least so far from his mind, because it's dealing with almost immediate issues.
Okay, and then it depends on how you speak up as well, because we can probably have an hour discussion about Julius Malema and the things that he has said. So the Afrikaner in particular is very sensitive towards that, and it has the perception that this man is actually serious when he says, kill the Boer. Do you believe he's serious? What does it mean?
Well, I wouldn't know whether he's serious or not, but the point here is, number one, the issue of the song. I've written an article on this. The issue of the song, we need to have a much more broader perspective, a much more broader conversation. The first question is, why do you still have Black African people who still feel strongly that they need to sing the song? Why? Secondly, when those individuals, for whatever reason, sing the song, do you as an Afrikaner, as an example, feel threatened? Do you believe that Black African people one day will really slaughter white people? Thirdly, if the matter, as it were, is in court, and in all probability it will end up in the Constitutional Court, if the court says, Julius, leadership of the EFF and all the members, you cannot sing the song in public, because that's what the issue is about. Can they sing the song in public or not? Will that make you, as an example, feel much safer, purely because the court has said EFF cannot sing the song, Kill the Boer or Tubulipun? This is exactly my point. The issue of the court systems, whilst, yes, we do need the judicial system for obvious reasons, but there are certain issues which can never be dealt with comprehensively by the judicial system. The issue of trust between races in this country can never be dealt with by the justice system at all. This particular issue that we are talking about is exactly that point. The court will decide on this. The court will decide on this on one way or the other. I agree with that. But let's assume that it says in its judgment, okay, EFF don't sing the song. Will that make you feel secured? The answer is no. The answer is no. We all know that the answer is.
How should this issue then be addressed?
Because what we are dealing with is the mistrust, and that issue of mistrust, unfortunately, cannot be dealt with within the realms of a judicial system. What you need to develop trust, it's something else. It's open. This is exactly what we were talking about earlier on, Freek. It's open, frank conversations. What keeps you awake at night? That is not going to be dealt with by the judicial system. We need it, especially, as I said, just prior to 1994, and also very important, just after 1994. Those type of conversations, what keeps you awake at night? What worries you as a group of people? What is it that you think needs to be done? That issue can never be dealt with by the judicial system, ever. We need a different system to build the trust between races. And once that trust has been established, it will not matter whether there is somebody who, for whatever reasons, wants to sing a particular song or not, because there will be trust. Now we are obsessed. Now the issue about the song is so huge because there is this anyway underlying trust, mistrust, that is.
What can be done about that?
Let's go back to number one. We need to accept that the role that can be played by the judicial system is very limited in this case. So that is where it starts. Going to the court of law is just not going to help, because either way you win in court, but you're still losing. We need to build trust. How do you build trust with your spouse? How do you build trust with your team? Communication, communication, and communication. You see what we do in this country, just like now, it's Rugby World Cup. Hopefully the Springboks can successfully defend the cup. They bring it back. It's all exciting for those couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks when they're taking the cup around the country. It's exciting, it's great, I admit. But then what happens? We've been there before. We cannot build trust based on events. We need to build trust based on communication, open communication. And for that matter, if you and I disagree, it does not matter. I think we obsess about that we need to agree all the time. And that is why we cannot have open conversations. You know, if you and I disagree, we just disagree. We're two individuals, we cannot agree on everything. And that's it. We need to agree, well, at least we need to have that sense that as part of building the trust, there will be a lot of emotion involved. Voices might be raised, which is okay. We are building trust. Let us not be afraid of being uncomfortable. The issue of reparations, I find it very strange that we've never had that conversation on a national scale in this country. That whether reparations really happen or that's a secondary issue, but the issue of how can so much happen to a people and then you do not talk about the issue of reparations? Or what about an apology? As an example, whether the apology happens or not, but at least can we at least put on the table why there was no apology? As an example, you see, that's part of building the trust. Maybe there
was F.W. de Klerk who
there was no platform.
So when he apologized, do you believe him, essence of what he said?
The apology.
Yes. F.W. de Klerk.
Yes, I'm talking about the apology pre-1994, that how can you have so much or injustice, gross injustice over a number of decades, centuries, and when you say, now we are starting afresh, which is fine, but if there was someone who was wronged, can't we at least have that conversation that, but there was a wrong that happened, at least an acknowledgement, number one, there was wrong that happened, and if there is a need for an apology, whether the apology happens or not, at least can we have on a national scale the issue of, but was there a need even for an apology? You see, that is what builds the trust. And the South Africans, no, I'm certain that, no, it will like, no, what apology? No, there's never going to be an apology. You see, that's it. And then when the issue of the song comes through, we just focus on the song in isolation to bigger issues which we have as a country. And I think it will not help us to forever rush to court, because the roles of the court in this case, their roles are very limited. We need to relook at the other systems where we can just engage openly. As I said, if I disagree with you, then it's fine. But at least there is that open engagement instead of each and every time we run to court. When it comes to the issue of voting, we vote along racial lines. We will never solve South African problems if we continue voting along racial lines. Because other individuals, they will just know, based on the demographics of this country, that they will. So they'll just be arrogant, they will do as much as they please, because based on the demographics of this country, you know what the result will be. So that can only happen if we have open engagement and build trust. I will always go back to this issue of building trust, and you build trust through open communication.
It seems that all the races in this country have issues that they find in the past, and always dragging the past into the future or the present as well. So how to deal with the past is probably one of the most serious issues for South Africans, because we, the Afrikaner, after the Second Boer War, still had that feeling inside that we will not easily forgive the English guys for what they did in this country. And the same way, you probably feel that way about apartheid, isn't it?
Yes, I've been invited by the number of Afrikaners, by the way, into their farms in different parts of the country, and we sit and we have brandy, and the issue of what now we call the South African War, but at the time or in the past was called as the Second Anglo-Boer War, is still a sensitive issue. You see, that's part of the conversation. The issue of what happened, the concentration camps that happened as part of what was then called the Second Anglo-Boer War. It's when we are building the country, that's part of the conversation that we need to have, that there are people in this country who have never forgiven that event, never, ever. And for as long as they live, they will also tell their children, and their children will tell their, and so you also have just this generational almost baggage that this is what happened to our forefathers. So if we want to build the country, we need to talk about the issue of concentration camps. Otherwise, it just becomes this this sore issue, this emotive issue that nobody talks about in public, but you will talk about it to your family members, and then the kids get to know about it, and the grandkids, and so forth and so on. And 200 years from now, it will still be a sensitive sore point. How do you deal with it? Open engagement. I agree with you. It is a sensitive issue, and anybody who has spoken openly to a couple of Afrikaners, you feel that issue of the concentration camps during the Second Anglo-Boer War, it's a very sensitive issue. So as part of building the country, yes, we have to have that conversation, but also we also need to have other conversations post 1994, or at least post 1948.
You also said, as I quoted earlier, that we must speak up before it's too late. What do you mean by too late?
Look, as I said earlier, I've traveled extensively, and in my travels, I've gone through failed states, all right? Once you become a failed state, you ain't coming up again. I think I mentioned that earlier on. So our responsibility, especially as adults, amongst other things, is to ensure that this country does not become a failed state. If you speak to any individual who has lived through a failed state, they will tell you that when you go to bed, you do not wake up just in a failed state. You do not go to bed in a country that is not perfect, but is functioning well, and then you wake up in a failed state. It's always a gradual decline before you become a failed state. So it is all up to us as South Africans that we ensure that we do not become a failed state. It is ensure that we speak truth to power. When things happen, we do not protect certain individuals that are compromised. We do not stay at home, as an example, when we are supposed to vote. We do not, defend the undefendable. The issue of load shedding, which affects all of us. It's very important that we speak up. We are in a mess because other people just never did their job. I've said this before, that we create most of our energy from coal, and we've got coal in this country. Can you imagine if we were importing coal? And yet there are countries, by the way, which import coal and they still don't have load shedding. So that is the whole issue about holding our leaders to account. Load shedding. Nobody, again, the issue of even just a proper, sincere apology. Maybe I missed it. Where have you seen a sincere apology that, look, we messed up? We were told by energy experts that at one stage, demand is going to surpass the supply. And we never listened to the experts, to the people that could see. Maybe I missed that apology. You see, that's it. And then it's just like now, all of a sudden, because they're individuals with money, okay, they're getting solar, they're trying all sorts of alternatives. But what is the impact thereof? So speaking up is exactly that. It's saying, no. It's not good enough that you tell us about what you are doing in order to ensure that load shedding is minimized. Let us talk about why do we even have load shedding in the first place? That is what I'm talking about speaking truth to power and not sitting on the fence. That's exactly part of the problem sometimes as South Africans, is that we love sitting on the fence. We do not want to make our point known publicly. Having certain conversations with your friends and family members when you're having braais, all good and well, but we need to do more than just that. Speaking up is very important. Otherwise, we could have done better. By then, we would be in a proper failed state, and it will be too late for our children and our grandchildren.
And lastly, do you have hope?
Of course. I am hopeful. I am hopeful. We can never lose hope. As a people, we must never lose hope, both at a collective level and at an individual level. I'm definitely hopeful that the future of this country is bright. However, certain decisions must be taken. And part of it is exactly that. And I'll keep going back to this, Freek. It's holding our leaders to account. Do not defend the undefendable. Think about your children and grandchildren, and do not be afraid of taking up a position. And let us have frank and open conversations. Even if it means we disagree, it's fine. But this thing of mumbling things when you are just with your family members and friends is not good enough. That is why we're in this mess, because we do not want to speak up. I can tell you now, Freek, being comfortable in a sinking Titanic because you are in the first class is not helping. If the entire ship is sinking, it really does not matter whether you're in the first class or in the third class. The entire ship is sinking. Irrespective of where you are in the country, if the entire country is going down, you are not going to be safe. So it is about time that we speak up, because we do not want to look back one day and say we let our children and our grandchildren down.
I'm part of an organization called Dialogue for Action. So I hope that we can make a contribution in whatever limited way we can, but still to speak up before it's too late. Thank you.
Of course.
All the best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, Freek.